If you are a new to Data People workshops, we do these once a month on lots of different topics in HR and talent acquisition. And we only have one rule. You're not supposed to talk about, I'm sorry, no, that's Fight Club. We only have one rule, and it's that it's not a webinar, it's a workshop. Even a topic like hiring regulations and compliance, there's no, we have the legal expert like Renee on the call, but a lot of you are on the ground practicing, dealing with these situations every day. We want to hear from you. So what's working, what's not working, what are the things that stress you out, and let the whole community sort of learn from each other. We found that'll make the best. So this is not a webinar, it's a workshop, and you're all part of it. But thank you for joining. I'm really excited. And thank you, Renee, for joining. I'm so excited to partner with you again.
I love having these little chats with you there. It's just very conversational. It's like we're catching up over coffee.
We're going to make compliance fun again, aren't we?
We are. We're going to try.
Renee, you are one of the most inspiring people I've met because you're a former chief legal officer, you're a former chief people officer, and those two are rare. And so you get both sides of the equation, and and you're also a startup founder. So it's kind of like all three personas in one, superhuman. Tell us a little bit of what Disputed AI and Blue Oak Legal and what you've been up to now.
Sure. I am the founder and CEO of Dispute AI and Blue Oak Legal. Blue Oak Legal, fairly simple. I have my own law firm representing mostly tech clients. And then Dispute AI has been my pet project, which has turned more into a full-time job recently. It's a start to finish dispute resolution platform that's entirely AI led. So you can send and respond to a demand letter. You can use our AI mediator. And if you're able to resolve your dispute, sign a simple settlement agreement. We actually see a lot of employer-employee disputes on the platform. And so it's been a fun project that I've been working on for the last year plus. Never envisioned myself as a startup founder, but I got an idea in my head that I just couldn't shake. And so I'm doing all the things. I also teach negotiations at the University of New Hampshire, the business school there. So I'm definitely staying busy.
That's incredible. I'm going to ask you one question. I mean, we come to you a lot for all sorts of advice and consulting at, Blue Oak Legal. And you're one of the best employment lawyers that, I've worked with.
Thank you.
When companies come to you, I imagine they often come to you with sticky situations that may range, but also what are the types of like projects that you'd sort of take on that are more systematic especially around HR regulations? Like when should customers come to you?
Sure. In my law firm, I serve as a fractional general counsel. And so I can help with all sorts of things. Employment law was my first love. And so from an employment law perspective, I do a lot of employee employee handbooks, near and dear to your heart, kind of making sure that job descriptions are, compliant with legal regulations, especially EEO statements. I can do a lot of, looking at your offer letters, looking at your separation agreements, making sure that all of your templates are, complying with applicable law. And so really anything employment related. And then there's the kind of thorny issues that come up from time to time, claims of discrimination, harassment, any weird things that are going on in the workplace that people aren't sure how to deal with. I get a lot of those calls as well, which I love those calls. They're very fun for me.
Yeah. And it's tricky because I'd say has everything just gotten super complicated post-pandemic? Because I feel like it's just so much harder to navigate the world.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot more conflict, honestly, in the workplace, and a lot more regulation. And I think that can make it difficult to be an employer and figure out how to navigate a lot of these challenges. I think it can be difficult for employees too, who maybe have never been in an office before and don't know how to
Yeah.
be, an in-person employee. And so I do think the workplace is a weird place right now, and maybe 5 years from now it'll normalize, but I think there's a lot of tension in the workplace right now.
It is a weird place. We had an office for a while. We're fully distributed. I wanted to sue somebody for microwaving fish, but apparently I'm not allowed to do that easily. So maybe
Apparently
that's for the
not.
best. Audience, I turn to you. We're going to talk a few different topics today. We're going to talk pay transparency. We're going to talk AI. We're going to talk audits. We're going to talk sort of instrumenting compliance. I want to know from you on the chat, what's on your mind? What do you want to learn about? What are you struggling with? What's on people's minds? I'm going to give you all a little bit of time so that we can, I can sort of guide Renee in our conversation to really focus on the topics that, that are really topical because we're in a very, very dynamic and changing environment. We're starting to get some interesting ideas in building trust in AI. We're definitely going to talk about that. Wow, there's a lot of AI. Well, that's gonna be our second topic. And we're going to definitely get into getting to some of those areas because those are practical questions. And I'll be honest with you on AI. Renee and I are going to have some ideas. But there's no we're in a whole new world. And I'd love to learn from you what you're doing and how you're thinking about this as well. So let's get into this. The first is just compliance used to be one of those things that we sort of I as a HR practitioner, it was part of our job to check, but you'd kind of say, okay, legal's going to tell me what to do. And I'm going to follow legal's guidance. It's a thing. And I'm not sure if even legal's able to keep up. Renee, you've had this unique role where you were both a chief legal officer and a chief people officer. And so you had people in your team that were not lawyers, were HR practitioners, recruiters. In your mind, what is the responsibility of an HR practitioner or TA practitioner to stay abreast with compliance and regulations?
Sure. So I don't know the statistics for this, but I would guess that most companies don't necessarily have a legal department. And certainly hiring your first employment lawyer, a lot of companies don't do that until you have 1,000 plus employees, right? And so I would say for most companies where that's the case, it really is the HR, the people team that's responsible for compliance.
Yeah,
Um, and so, and even when you do have a legal team or an employment lawyer who's dedicated to you, you're partnering with them. They're guiding you on what the laws might be and how you could comply with them, different options for doing that. But you as the people team are responsible for the day-to-day implementation, the day-to-day compliance. And so to me, it's not something where you can say like that's legal's responsibility because
yeah.
you're on the front lines. You're managing the data. You have your ATS, you have your HRIS system. You need to know, what your compliance obligations are. And of course, a lot of these tools try to help you through that. But you need to kind of, you know, make sure that you're staying up to date on your own by reading, by going to these types of webinars, by utilizing the tools that are made available to you from these, systems that you're using, and hopefully having legal counsel. If you don't have them internally, have them externally, and that you can take advantage of, some of the materials that they put out or ask them questions if you're not sure. So I think
Yeah,
it's on the people team to do it because even if you have a legal team, they're not going to do it for you. They,
yeah.
they'll tell you kind of, they'll give you some guardrails, but you have to do it yourself. So you're the front line.
I think that's exactly right. One of the things that, it's very clear is it has to be a priority. There's so many different, I mean, HR and TA are so incredibly resource strapped. And job security in our industry is now at an all-time low. The last thing you want to be, in my mind, is the reason why your company got audited or you got fined. So I sort of view sort of a few big things to keep in mind. You've got sort of this reduced time. You just don't have time for the audit. And like just the other day, I was talking to a company and they got audited by Washington State because they accidentally used um, a part-time role with a full-time with full-time benefits. And they were like, hang on a second, this doesn't count. It just takes one job, and the next thing you know, it's hours and hours of time. And you don't want to be the TA team or the TA person that triggered that by accident. The second is fines, New York State, there's fines. There's some big fines out there. Now there are cure periods. The third is, revenue. You don't want to OFCCP is still a thing. Internationally, there's versions of OFCCP now in Ontario State and province in Canada and the UK. So it's going to hurt that. But and the other piece is brand. The number of times I'm seeing jobs that don't have pay transparency going viral on LinkedIn. Not to mention those types of jobs don't even do very well on Indeed and LinkedIn. How do you kind of when you were a chief people officer, how would you resource your teams to learn about these things? Because so much is happening. You'd obviously encourage them to hop on workshops like this, but do you actually bring it up in your monthly meetings? Is those the kinds of things that you do?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure, my team may not have wanted me to put on my legal hat as often as I did, but, education is a big part of, being able to
Yeah,
fulfill your role as a member of a people team, whether that's TA or operations or even your HRBPs. Um, if you're not educating them on what they need to be doing, what the latest best
yeah,
practices are, I think you're not doing your job. And I think even if you don't have a legal background or a dual title, I think that you need to be, if you're a chief people officer or you're head of TA or
yeah,
one of the departments within people, you have to make sure that either you're spending the time understanding, what's required of you, or there's someone on your team who's responsible for doing that and reporting out to the rest of the team. It doesn't have to be a full-time job. I think what happens to a lot of people is you kind of see these onesie twosie laws come out, right? So, okay, there's a new law over here in Washington. Okay, now there's one in New York City, and but New York State doesn't have one. And so I think you could spend a lot of time trying to understand the patchwork of
yeah,
regulation, especially, if we're talking pay transparency. What I encourage, my clients and people teams to do is think of it more holistically. Like to your point about, job descriptions going viral if they don't have the salary range. Um, I think we've come to a point, at least from where I sit, where adding a salary range and benefits info to the job description is the right thing to do, regardless of what the law says,
and
right?
those jobs do better
Because,
on all the channels too.
say it again.
Those jobs do better on the different channels too. They get better
Exactly.
qualified candidates. They get better promoted on LinkedIn and Indeed.
Right. And to me, it's one thing, it's a sign of respect, and two,
Yeah,
it's like a time saver, both for the candidate and for the
yeah,
company. If you're talking about, smaller teams have no time or support, we've got these small teams, maybe there've been layoffs at your tech
yeah,
company. You don't have many people left in TA. You're wasting TA's time and the candidate's time by not adding the pay information to your job description,
I
because
agree.
people will self-select out and self-select in based on that. And so if you're not showing that till the end of the process, or you're trying to say like, oh, we don't need to show it in this state, but we have to show it in this
Yeah,
state, I think you're getting lost in kind of the patchwork of laws. And to me, you just kind of just think of it holistically. Like it's the right thing to do. It saves everyone time on both sides of the equation, and
yeah,
it's respectful of, of people's needs. Salary
I
is
agree.
is one of the more important things about a job, and I think we all just need to be super transparent about it.
That's exactly right. The risk, though, is, and a number of companies have stepped into this, is putting salaries out without double checking their internal leveling properly. And so you end up so we had a situation in, I think it was California, where one of the large tech companies was sued, not sued, but was the California Department of Labor filed a claim against them because several employees complained that the posted range for a job was higher than the range that they were making at the exact same level. And that becomes like a sticky point. I want to ask the audience a question here again. How often do you talk about compliance and regulations in your internal TA HR meetings? Like, is it never? Is it once a quarter? Is it once a month? Like, how do you, is it left to you on your own devices to go figure this out? Or is there a conversation that's happening? And I think that's the best practice. We all need to figure out what is the right level of, what's the right cadence.
And while we're waiting for responses to come in, I will say before I had the dual hat of being a chief people officer and a chief legal officer, I would, as an employment attorney, the HR team was my partner. They were my client. And so
Yeah.
I would sit in on their, weekly team meetings or their monthly team meetings and, obviously try to proactively educate them, but also just by being embedded with them, you can listen to things that they're doing, give some pointers on like, hey, you may want to do this differently. And you be so much better at your job by understanding how they do their jobs. And so I think one of the best practices for tech companies who do have a legal team, certainly an employment attorney, is to embed them with their client, so that
Yeah.
they are can be more proactive as opposed to just waiting for something to happen. You can kind of guide in the moment, and that was really effective for me early in my career as well.
I love that. And it sort of mirrors it. I'm actually surprised. Half the audience seems to say when issues come up. And some of the audience members seems to have issues come up quite frequently, it sounds like. But I really like that there's a number of folks on the chat who are talking about regularity, cadence, monthly. And I would almost be like if you're a TA HR leader and you've got your monthly syncs, I think reminding people of compliance and regulatory changes like the first 15 minutes because it's so dry. It's very hard to sit through a whole webinar, 3 webinars on this topic. We're going to make this fun, but it's so dry. Regularity is so important. But let's get to why this is becoming an issue. So there's 3 types of compliance that I think we need to be really aware of. So there's the regulatory compliance. Pay transparency is probably the newest kid in the block. That you've had ADA, you've AI, actually AI is the newest. And then you're actually industry specific laws. I was surprised, like in finance, the SEC marketing laws, the SEC marketing rule applies to like job descriptions. And so you can't say stuff like leading if you're like an investment firm. And those becomes really important, they become tricky. The second is audit requirements. So OFCCP, EEO, or normal FLSA has, been uh, been really big. But then also you've got all these industry audit requirements as well, NCQA, DHS and ISO. The interesting other element of compliance that I'm starting to see is internal policies. Really, like to your point, I want to post salary ranges in all North American jobs. That's a policy that you want to instrument. We're seeing brand compliance be a really big deal. And those are important. I love Bill's point about talking about fun clients. Can we make it fun? Uh, we have to. So I want to talk. So let's first talk about pay transparency compliance that's evolving. It's bananas how quickly it's evolving. Like it started, if you remember, in Colorado, and then look at just in this year, the slew of changes from Illinois, Hawaii. We're going to have Massachusetts in August. I think if there's anyone, Indeed was Indeed's last estimates was that about 60% of US jobs now have pay ranges. And I have to imagine we're going to be north of 80% in the next year or so. So that's a good thing, but it
Great.
is complicated. Daniel says not in Canada yet. Daniel, that is not true. British Columbia has pay transparency laws, as does Phillips at Port Ed PEI, Edwards Islands. Um, and so we've got it is coming to Canada, and Ontario now has an OFCCP equivalent. So yeah, this is the complication. We can't all keep it in our heads anymore. Um, what's also really confusing is how different some of these are. State by state variations, and then cities have it. Uh, like how do you I think at this point, Renee, we just have to make it US wide, right? We just kind of have to, if you're a US employer, you can't manage this at such a micro level, can you?
I don't think you can anymore. It's kind of, it's similar to the sick time
Yeah,
laws that are out there, that they're state, they're local. And so I think you have to kind of take the position that you're going to comply in all of the US and figure out what the most restrictive law is. Usually
yeah.
California, but not, sometimes Massachusetts and New York try to have something to say there.
Colorado is the most aggressive in all
Yeah,
of those.
Colorado. And take that one as the one that you're gonna comply with and just do it. So like
Yeah,
put the pay range on there.
yeah,
Have a link to your benefits packages.
yeah,
Um, basically just put it all out there and it doesn't you can live on your website so that you can just people can just kind of review the packages that you offer and if you're really transparent with all of that and you're trying in good
yeah,
faith to comply with all these laws, I think these states and the agencies that enforce them, they care about that. You know,
yeah,
they want to focus on the bad actors. They want
yeah,
to focus on the companies that have a pay range of $100,000 to $500,000, or something, the more ridiculous job postings like that. I
yeah,
think most agencies aren't going to waste their time if you're trying in good faith to comply with the spirit of these regulations, especially if you're a multi-state employer.
yeah,
Um, I think that they're not gonna spend their time on you if you're trying to comply. They're gonna spend their time
yeah.
on the companies that either aren't complying or are really not complying with the spirit of it, right? Like, pay
That's right.
range, 100,000 to $500,000. Like, those are the companies that these agencies are going to go after.
That's right. Um, so there's two developments that are really critical to kind of keep in mind. The first is there was finally an update to Washington law. I don't know if all of you were following, but when Washington rolled out their law in 2023, they allowed class action suits, and for every candidate that was affected was eligible for up to $5,000 in compensation. Massive. And so what it resulted is these effective personal injury type law firms, but rolling up crazy. So there's one law firm in 2023 filed 31 lawsuits on the same day, going after dozens of companies. So in 2 months ago, I think Washington State finally updated it to say provide a cure period, which is really useful. So now, like many other states, they have a 5-day cure where you can update your job so you can do in good faith. It's no longer 5,000 per candidate, but it's anywhere from 100 to 5,000, so it's less punitive. They're trying to discourage like the cottage industry of aggressive litigation that was coming up. The the second big development that I noticed was Colorado clarified that you cannot just say this job is remote, excluding Colorado, which some companies were trying to do to get past pay transparency laws. Like now, if it's remote, and you've got employees in Colorado, you are bound by the same laws. And I suspect there's just no avoiding this. Renee, there's a really good question on the chat, which is now let's say you're a company that posts jobs, like you're posting sales jobs everywhere. So you're posting them in Washington State, California, and Mississippi. Massively different labor markets, different pay ranges. How do you caveat?
It's a good question, and I think you can give the range, whatever it is, for that job, and then you can put, kind of a sentence after that says something like, where you fall in that range will be subject to experience,
Yeah,
geography, and kind of list
yeah,
out all the things that will will determine where you slot a particular person in.
I
Um,
think that's right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same as a conversation about experience or
Yeah.
it's basically like the candidate's going to say, I want to be at the top of the range. And you're going to have to say, well, given where you live, given your years of experience, given other employees that we
Yeah.
have in this role, right? Because you
Yeah.
want to point to internal pay equity. You can say, for this role, this is really where we would see you slotting in.
It's exactly right.
I think that you can do that, rather than, trying to post, okay, well, Mississippi is this range and California is this range. I think you can include the larger range and then just, basically have a CYA sentence in there that says, where you fall within that
Depends
range
on
will be.
geography.
Yeah, exactly.
I prefer that. I have seen some companies try to do the tier A city, tier B city, tier C city. It gets really complicated fast, and the big problem is it really impacts the candidate experience because now you've got this ginormous like paragraph sort of below your every job description, and it's confusing. I
It is.
like how Jennifer is suggesting it. That's exactly, I think, aligns with what you suggested. Just provide the range, and you got to make sure it's a good faith range. So it's not too broad. I've seen some companies go like 500,000, $500 to $500,000 is just absurd. I just want to remind folks in the chat, I love the chat, and some of your comments are phenomenal. But remember to share them with everyone, not just with hosts and panelists, so everyone gets to see them. Um, One question, at what point does broadness of a range become a turnoff for the job seeker, Tristan? That's an excellent question. I think before it becomes a turnoff for the job, it actually, you run the risk of um, of violating what is good faith ranges. So if Colorado started to crack down, and I'm going to show you an example in just a minute as to what they've determined is too broad in terms of a range. And so you're not going to be able to do that. So first I want to talk about a few common misconceptions about pay transparency compliance. And let's deal with those. Number one, that it's only about salary ranges. So we've laid this out and we've got this, and we're going to share these slides. We're going to share the cheat sheet, so you'll have plenty of this. But a number of states require you to say non-wage compensation, which is equity, which is commissions, which is bonuses. A number of states require you to talk about benefits as well. Washington State is the most onerous, also asks you to talk about leave. So this is super important. It's just ideally, if you're posting jobs in Washington, Colorado, California, I imagine you want to go fairly conservative and make sure your templates reflect all of these. I see the common mistake that a lot of companies are making is they don't provide benefits information. And if you're a nationwide employer, you're going to get tripped up. Number two misconception that these fines are pretty small. So just this year, Colorado fined a company $550,000. And I was reading that filing and I was like, oh my Lord. But there were 46 different violations. And it was mostly pay transparency and the amount of audit requirements. Now, I've heard anecdotally a lot of companies getting audited. Illinois is becoming really aggressive. One of the other big fines is New York City. So New York City's fines is $250,000 per violation. Usually most states are like $5,000. New York City it's less enforced. They have a better cure period. They allow you, some ability to kind of rectify. But I think that grace window is now finishing, and you're going to start to see, and especially we're going to have a different mayor potentially. Like we're going to see potentially more action. And so this is something that we've got to be careful because it's a huge labor market here. The second thing is the hours and audit support that I'm hearing of is just legal is getting drowned and HR is getting drowned in audit every time a state decides to audit you. And I'm going to show you some examples of like the kinds of things they want to check in. And the third is brand harm. When you put in like these things, it's just if you're spending a few $100,000 on recruitment marketing in a year, Indeed ads, LinkedIn ads, and those ads don't run because you don't have the pay transparency ranges, that's just worse. And we got to make sure we sort of deal with the syndication. The third thing I want to talk about, the third misconception is that it's only state. I was a little surprised by this. So most of the cities are also parts of states that have pay transparency. New York City and New York State both have it. Jersey City and New Jersey now will both have it. Cleveland. Did not expect Cleveland to represent here so hard as a pay transparency city. Renee, is it as enforceable? Like if you're a chief legal officer at a company, are you as worried about city level regulation than state level? Because it becomes all pretty gnarly to manage it at that level.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the cities can be more active than the states. Depending on where you are, maybe they have different or more resources, or it's become something that they're known for, and so they really want to make a name for themselves or show that they're out there trying to make the world a better place. So yeah, absolutely worried about the cities.
Yeah,
It varies, the enforcement of these things, but there's a reason they passed the law or the ordinance, right? Clearly they thought it was a problem and they have some resources to try to enforce it. So yeah, absolutely worry about these cities as well.
that makes a ton of sense. One of the things that I actually worry about with cities, New York City, for example, has a public portal where they call out employers who are violating. And so they're reputational, even if their fines aren't immediately levied, the reputational damage becomes a lot more because then news picks it up. I remember last year, news picked up a whole bunch of New York City employers, and you just sort of, it just hurts the brand. Whereas the states are a little bit more coy about they're more aggressive with the fines sometimes, but a little bit less aggressive with sort of the public shaming that seems to
Exactly.
come.
Hey, shaming is free and effective.
It's very effective. Misconception four is a number in the job ad is good enough. So we saw both Colorado and Washington in the last 12 months start to kind of clarify that you needed to put a good faith range. And I think there's a question earlier is, what is a turnoff for candidates? So Colorado sort of specified, they found a couple of violations, and I pulled this from filings. 18 to 48, too wide. 100, they don't specify what is a good faith range. Like they don't say 10% or 20%. Like there's not, but they are willing to specify what is not a good faith range. And I thought 150 to 225 seemed reasonable. And a lot of companies kind of have those types of ranges, but that was too broad for Colorado. What do you do if you're like, again, if you're HR running, this kind of like, you're kind of playing a bit of a guessing game here, aren't you?
Yeah, this one's tough. I mean, to me, 18 to 48 an hour, too broad.
Yeah,
Because uh, if you've got an hourly worker, that to me, is just that's more than geography, that's more than experience. That's like 18 an hour and 48 an hour. Those are different roles.
those are
Like
different jobs. Yep.
the 150 to 225, like that's tough because especially if we're talking, a remote job, right? So say
Yeah.
that's a remote engineering job or, whatever example you want to use, 150 to 225, depending on where you live, that's legit to me. And so you know, uh, I think if it is 150 to 225, maybe it didn't have that caveat of like, depending on local geography, depending on years of experience.
Yeah.
Um, I think the advice is keep it as narrow as you possibly can. Um,
Yeah.
and if it is broad, try to put some language in there explaining why it's so broad. And that, should get you most of the way there with the regulators and ideally with candidates as well. But
Yeah.
you got to do the work. You can't 18 to 48, again, totally different jobs. So you've got to, do the work and understand like what a reasonable range is, but also kind of give context if needed if you have a broad range.
Exactly. Interesting question in the chat is like, was Colorado successful? So in its suit, Colorado, these aren't suits, they're fines they levy, and those fines are appealable. So this one's still open. And it's rarely just one. Like, I think if this was the only violation, they probably wouldn't. But this was one of several violations that the company had. And so once you open the can of worms, once you have a few jobs that don't have pay transparency ranges at all, they start to build a very comprehensive case on
Yeah.
all the things. And again, like the remediation, so when they fined this company, it wasn't just the fine, it was that there was a 12-week period where they were going to monitor those jobs and make sure that they were going to be in a compliance. Like there's all of these additional cures and audit requirements that come with it.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think when we're talking about fines, especially with these, states that have cure periods, something else was happening here, right?
yeah,
If they got dinged for 150 to 225, my guess is there was some sort of bad faith, or there were,
yeah,
multiple, like you said, multiple violations. Um, Again, in what I'm seeing, the enforcement is focused on those that, are acting in bad faith,
that's right.
as opposed to those who were really trying to comply. And so my guess is there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes than we're privy
There's
to,
always, there's always,
that
yeah.
kind of made this, stand out for some reason.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Tristan, that's a very thoughtful question. What recommendations do you have for publishing pay transparency internally, not to existing employees, not just in job ads and job descriptions?
Ooh, that one's tough.
Yeah.
Tristan with the hard hitting questions. I think obviously the caveats are it's really complicated. Pay ranges are, even when done well, really complicated. And you've got, if you've got multiple people in the same role, there can be a reason why, they're at
That's
a
right.
certain, obviously you're not going to publish individual salaries or
That's right.
individual, compensation, but the pay ranges, there's a lot of factors that determine what that range is internally.
Yep.
And so, I think there are some employers that do publish those,
Yeah.
in an effort to be radically transparent.
Yep.
But I think you have to be really careful when you do publish those, because people are gonna, like, they will literally drop everything and look at those,
Yeah.
because they want to know where they fall in that, and then they start thinking,
Yep.
well, why am I not at the top? I'm better than Sally Smith over there who's fallen asleep in her cubicle. Um, and so I
Yeah.
think I don't know if we're there yet with that. I just think it's too fraught with errors. I don't know a lot of companies that do internal pay equity really well yet. They
Yeah.
try, but I just think it's pretty dangerous, and it's always changing, right? So if you
I
publish it
agree with you.
once, then you got to publish it, at the mid-year cycle, then you got to publish it again at the end of year cycle. And I don't know that you get a lot of value out of that
There's
internally.
only downside.
Yeah, I think it's more downside than upside at this point. Um,
But
uh,
the thing that big employers are increasingly doing better and should do better is having proper internal mobility. So having a internal job site where, if you're making jobs available for internal promotions, internal transfers, putting as much care into those jobs as you do with external jobs. In fact, with a number of the New York City complaints, the complaints came from internal candidates who had applied for a job and did not feel like they had access to pay transparency. And I think that's a reasonable middle path where here's an actual job you can apply to, here's the range, but we're not going to publish ranges for every single role in our company that isn't being advertised.
well, and I also think a lot of these something that gets lost in a lot of these pay transparency laws is many of them give current employees the ability to ask the range for their role,
Yeah,
right? And so, I think that part exists. And so if an employee comes and asks, you probably should disclose it, or, do the research and then figure out what it is. But these pay transparency laws often give employees the right to do that. And so I think
That's
you
right.
need to be prepared to disclose and then decide whether you want to just do it proactively.
Yeah,
There's a lot that goes into, deciding to do that.
exactly right. The fifth misconception is it only applies to your website and not to. And so I post a complaint that Washington State had, which was, and Colorado's clarified this, where it's not just on your website, but also on, and they specifically cite Indeed, where you choose to publish your opportunity. So if you're promoting jobs on Indeed or LinkedIn, the expectation is that your benefits, your salary ranges will also be there. And one of the wrinkles is some of these job boards strip out links. So if you put in a link, for example, on ZipRecruiter strips out, so you can't just say, oh, reference our company career page. You kind of have to have some of the core elements in there as well. So put this in all of your templates. Um, so we've talked about pay transparency. I actually want to now quickly switch gears. I don't think we'll have as much time to talk about audit today, but I love all the audience participation. So I want to switch gears to AI because it's top of mind. It's what we're all thinking about. And AI regulation. So EU launched their AI regulation last year, which was about CV. They were very specific in their language. CV sorting, managing are all deemed as high risk and therefore require bias audits, require disclosure, require all of those. And then, of course, New York City has been leading the way, and Illinois has been leading the way on what they call automated employment decisions, where you've got to be disclose them, you've got to have bias audits, all of those things. It's kind of we're in a weird world, and then running on top of that, Workday is getting sued in what is a big class action. How should we think about deploying AI in our organizations and like in this environment?
Yeah, it's interesting because, when we talked about the pay transparency laws, we talked about the patchwork that's, that exists in the US between cities and states. And um, instead of complying with the patchwork, take that holistic view and just put it in all of your job descriptions and your posts. I don't know if we're there yet with AI, but I think, so these laws are not as frequent and common, right? There aren't as many of them as there are pay transparency laws. So I do think at this point you may take the approach that, okay, we're just going to apply to the ones that, we're going to comply with the ones that apply to us, right?
Yeah,
So we're in California, we're in Colorado, so we'll try to comply. I think pretty soon it's going to flip where you'll just want to holistically comply with the spirit of these laws, right?
yeah,
Which from what I'm seeing, a lot of it is human oversight,
yeah,
disclosures, and
yeah,
that's something that will be, the people team will be responsible for.
yeah,
And then data protection on the back end,
yeah,
which you need to work with your software providers and your legal team and your IT and security teams to get that piece. But a lot of the laws are focused on that, right?
yeah,
Like, um, and so I think you very soon, maybe in the next year, you may get to the point where it tips and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to comply with the spirit of all of
yeah,
these across the board and say, we had human people setting up whatever the parameters
yeah,
are, whatever's going to knock someone out of this process or move them along. And human oversight throughout the process to make sure that it's doing, what we set it up to do.
yeah,
Being super transparent. Like to me, I like to lead with transparency in all of this stuff. And so being transparent about how AI is being used and when.
yeah.
Um, and then again, like, making sure you're locked up on the back end with all of this data.
I think that's right. I think one of the mistakes when I was looking through the very interesting sort of lawsuit in Workday, one of the things that it was very clear was that it seemed to be completely automated. The person was applying and getting rejected almost instantly by a system, like not humanly possible. And that creates, while I don't think I think we're all going to have to use AI in our jobs. Like there's no avoiding the big technological shift that's coming. The idea, I don't think anyone's comfortable with zero human oversight in rejection, and that is going to be a guardrail that we deal with. And I completely agree with you on disclosure. I'm surprised how little disclosure there is. So this is an example of one of the companies that discloses how they use AI. It's in all of their jobs. This is a very good way to do disclosure. One of the things the Data People platform does is if you do use these things, we like to check and help you sort of comply with disclosure laws in your job descriptions. Um, it's so important, and I don't think enough companies are doing this. And it just, again, it creates, and I can see why they don't want to do it because they're worried that candidates react to this. But if you're, I don't know, if I'm getting interviewed by an avatar, I'd like to know in my job description that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I've actually been reading a fair amount of articles lately about people being surprised that their screening interview is with AI.
Yeah,
Um, and some people may self-select out of that if they knew in advance and say like, oh,
yeah,
that's creepy, or I don't want to work there if they're using AI. And some people may be like, oh, that's super cool. That I'm interested to see what that looks like. But I think surprising someone when they show up for their interview and they expect to be talking to a human and they're talking to some sort of AI bot or avatar. I don't think that's a great candidate experience either, right? So I think
yeah.
the disclosure can help in that regard too, because people may see these disclosures and self-select in or self-select out. And if you're not telling them up front what you're doing, they may down the road end up getting the ick factor or worse, right? Thinking that maybe you've made some sort of discriminatory hiring decision. And so I think the disclosures, even though they may be awkward, again, you're going to start seeing these. It's going to be similar to the EEO statement, the privacy statement that, a lot of job ads have. I think you're probably going to
Yeah,
start seeing more disclosures because I think it's going to flip and employers will realize it's better for candidate experience.
I agree.
You agree with everything I say. I love it.
We are generally aligned on a lot of
We
these
are
topics. Well,
generally.
we probably do spend way too much time talking about these things as it is. Uh, but some of the input that we continue to get in on the chat is fascinating. Thank you, audience, for sharing as much. Jennifer asked a really good question. Is anyone using AI personalities to interview candidates? I'm curious too. If you're using it, let us know. And also let us know how do you signal? How do you I'm not comfortable with that in our processes just yet. Uh I just think that you lose one of the mistakes I think companies make when they do their setup of the assessments is they bring too many people to that phone screen to begin with, and then it feels like, oh my God, we can't keep up. We need to kind of use these AI tools. I think having a more stringent phone screen or pre-screen process with the early on the process, and then having humans just solves for a better candidate experience. But I'm curious to see what the audience thinks. I want to touch very briefly on the topic of DE&I. This is an area, Renee, maybe you and I won't agree on. I don't know. Because this is the quagmire within the quagmire. And we're seeing this like a lot of our global companies that we talk to are struggling. In the US, it feels like DEI is now a bad word or a bad phrase. Abroad, it's critical. Employees, candidates kind of want it. They want they want an element of fairness and they want representation. They want to work for diverse teams. So how do you as an employer balance this? I mean, you saw the Target fallout, you're seeing all these different things. And one of the things that I think we've seen is we're starting to kind of get clarity on how the market is dealing with it. I can't say I have perfect advice for you all here, but I think I have some sort of pragmatic tips from what's happening in the world. So the first is a couple of clarifications are happening in the US too. So in the US, there's a lot of confusion because EEO and OFCCP kind of came out in January and they paused a lot of it. Just last week, um, the OFCCP has a new director, and they reiterated the waiver on enforcement was formally lifted. Now they're not enforcing, from what I understand, all of the DEI pieces that they were, but they are specifically focused on enforcement around ADA, disability, people with disability, making sure candidates with disability get a fair shake in your process, and that's critical. Because I still see a lot of jobs that don't have accommodation statements and things like that. The second thing that they're enforcing is veteran hiring, and making sure we're sort of fair. So it's not to say EO OFCCP is certainly not toothless. It's going to go back to kind of what it is. And what I'm seeing is more and more, I think maybe as a reaction to the US, Canada is enforcing, building their own OFCCP laws. The UK has been doing that. Germany's been doing that. So it's kind of becoming really important. What I think the balance people are finding, certainly, I think very few people are using the phrase DEI as much anymore. With something, they're calling it talent attraction. We're hearing it as belonging. But what's working is, for example, improving job ads, systematic approaches that open up your entire funnel and help you attract candidates of every background fairly. What we're seeing going away are things like some of the, diversity targets that used to be applied in the past, or bonuses tied to diversity targets that are specifically tied to gender or race or ethnicity, or specific interventions like the Rooney Rule. I think the Rooney Rule is an excellent sort of thing in very specific situations like the NFL, but is always something that was a little bit hard to kind of do correctly in most companies. So I'm not, I think sort of this makes sense. So I think what I'm starting to see is companies finding a pragmatic approach to it. It's not going away because I don't think employees want it to go away, but we're finding ways to kind of balance how we talk about it so we don't put ourselves in the crosshairs. I'm kind of curious, like, is there, it's so, I think with the different regulatory environments are always hard to navigate. Who do you typically, is this something that, like, if you're a large employer today, like, is this something you've got to be spending some time with counsel? Is this like how do you engage counsel and stuff like this pragmatically, Renee?
Yeah, I mean, I think DEI right now feels like the third rail of employment law. And
Yeah,
it's so fact and industry specific. It depends on whether you're receiving federal funding or not. I think it's hard to give, kind of high level advice here because it's so fact specific. But I think to
it
your
is.
point here, like affirmative action type programs are out, and treating everyone equally is I think a little safer. And so not focusing on any particular minority group, but focusing on, treating everyone equally with respect, things like that. And so I think it's definitely a difficult environment, if you're trying to comply with these DEI directives that are coming down, so I do think it's really fact specific and industry specific, and
Yep.
it's a needle that everyone's figuring out how to thread in real time. And it's hard. I don't pretend to have the answers. If you're an employer who really wants to lead with DEI, there's a lot that goes into it, and I think it's beyond
It's
the
tricky.
scope of this for sure.
But I think while we say that, it's never been a more important time to think about candidate experience and employee experience. And if it's one thing, even we saw all the way through pay transparency regulations and everything, it's sort of this convergence that the compliance frameworks and the candidate experience criticality is sort of aligned. And if that becomes your North Star, is that we want to make an exemplary candidate and employee experience, I think you'll be in good hands. And that should be sort of what you think about.
Yep, agreed.
So and I'm going to skip past this. I was going to talk about, just to end, common avoidable compliance mistakes that we're seeing happen over and over again that we should be really aware of. Number one is ATS automations. So a lot of companies, especially companies of scale, have like a ADP automation, a Workday automation, iCIMS automation, and it like looks at your job profile, job code, and then pre-populates your pay transparency. It's great, really cool. If you can put it together and make it work, that's good. I've noticed a lot of failure. Rates are high because what happens is the automations work the first time, but recruiter changes location, new job code wasn't there, and then you end up with placeholders, opens up risk. So you got to have a fail safe to sort of be able to get monitor if a job gets accidentally posted without the right ranges. The second that's related to this is with ADP and Workday, there's been a lot of push and SAP SuccessFactors for a lot of our customers and a lot of companies in the market to be true self-serve. The hiring managers are more and more responsible for initiating job recs, but they're not always trained about this. So oftentimes, then recruiters aren't paying as much attention. A job can slip through that is non-compliant. And we're seeing that become, in fact, a number of the situations that were prompted up were exactly that, where stuff fell through the cracks, especially at scale. So thinking about how to build better training as well as build better checks at those points are critical. The third, we talked about good faith ranges, companies posting ranges that are too wide, getting into the crosshairs. Very, very common problem, and tightening up those ranges is going to become very critical in sort of the couple of years ahead of us. The fourth is missing benefits. So more and more we're seeing willingness to company states are requiring benefits and having the right benefits. A number of times I'm sort of talking to companies where they accidentally put the wrong benefits or they didn't provide a complete list and it trips people up from a compliance standpoint. And then finally, just brand guidelines. There's in a world where candidate experience and employer brand is so critical, it's such a big differentiating factor. Having more people typically get to see your jobs than see your company's homepage. Having your brand poorly represented is just a hugely expensive mistake that we're seeing and we just can't afford. So this is kind of the focus. I want to talk about just how we think about using AI to enhance your compliance posture. And Data People is a very, very intuitive platform. We're sort of the first platform that thinks about AI and compliance in a really big way when it comes, especially to job descriptions. So we use it to help you monitor every published job and flag it up as soon as, so within the cure window, you can fix things like ADA compliance, salary disclosures at a very local level. And you should be completely automated. Anything that you're having to manually check should be automated and we automate for you. We help you set up your policies and then enforce them so hiring managers when writing jobs can follow the policies. So, Renee was talking about, just set up a policy that says you're going to require compensation on all US jobs, and we would enforce that automatically for you. And that's really important. The third is making sure it works directly in your ATS, making sure it works in Workday, in iCIMS, and Greenhouse, and whatever your ATS of choice is. And so that is really critical. And Tristan brings up a really good point. Like if you're recycling an old job description, how do you know that it was compliant then, it's no longer compliant? Well, that's exactly why we operate right in the ATS. When you recycle an old job, but before it gets posted, it reruns the checks for you. So it's always making sure you're being checked against the latest regulations, the latest requirements, and gives you the ability to fix and then finally, we have a brand new feature out called Flagship Jobs. If you're a Data People customer, next week, it's be out in your platform that lets you identify your best roles, identify flagship roles that you post frequently, and make sure that those are genuinely best in class. So people are using and recycling the best, most compliant content that's always being checked. So this is a little bit about us. If you want to learn more, we'd love to show you. One of the things we love doing for prospects is doing a free compliance check. We already track jobs of 40,000 companies every day, including yours. So let us run a compliance check and see how you're doing and see where some of the gaps might be and talk to you. Just ping us. Aaron will leave our email there and we're happy to set it up. Leads us to the end of our workshop. And I have to say, Renee, as compliance workshops go, this was one of the most participative ones I've seen from the audience. This was quite fun.
I know, I love all the action in the chat.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot
Yeah.
about how companies are doing things. This is complicated, Renee. So if any of the folks on the chat or on the recording want to reach you, is the website the best place? Is Blue Oak Legal the best place to reach you?
Yep.
Fantastic. You've been a really, really great person to partner with on this, and your insights are so incredible. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for taking the time.
Always a
And
pleasure.
audience, you've been one of my favorite audiences. I never thought I'd say that in a compliance workshop, but this has been a lot of fun. Please reach out if you want us to run an analysis of your jobs, if you want Renee's help, or if you just want to talk compliance. We're surprisingly nerdy about this very dry topic. But until then, until our next workshop in August, I hope you all have a wonderful summer. Renee, thanks again.
See you soon.
Have a great one, everyone.